Hello and welcome back to the Mind Council. My name is Sun Subi. Today I'm going to be talking to you more about the avoidant attachment style. Now, it's said the way that we are treated by our parents or caregivers when we are infants dictates the way that we behave in relationships when we are adults. Now, I don't necessarily agree with this, and I actually did another video on all of the attachment styles, which you can find by following the link here. And I explain why I don't necessarily agree with this concept in that video. But today I'm going to talk more about the avoidant attachment style. Now, it's said that adults who have an avoidant attachment style tend to have parents or caregivers who are not as attentive of, or who tend to disregard more their emotional needs, and they themselves are more emotionally distant from their child. Now, this doesn't mean that they necessarily completely neglect their child. It just means that they are not as hands-on and emotionally loving as other parents may be. So say, for example, if a child had a stomach ache and the child was in a lot of pain, a parent who is less emotionally attached to available for their child is going to take care of their physical needs. They are going to take them to the doctor, maybe even to A&E. However, they're not going to coddle the child or console the child in a way that they're going to pick them up and tell them, oh, everything is okay, or try to be very empathetic. In fact, what they might do is tell a child to toughen up, to not cry, and that everything is going to be okay. So it doesn't mean that they don't care at all. It just means they have a more hands-off parenting style. And when a child is going through something like this and a parent is telling them toughen up, everything's going to be okay, what they're learning is that when they show emotion, that the parent actually distance themselves from the child, and showing emotion is something that the parents do not tend to like. So the child is less likely to be more expressive with their emotions because they feel that when they are, their parents don't like it and they don't want their parents to not like them. So they tend to hide their emotions more so their parents will like them more. And this translates into adulthood relationships where a child is going to be a lot more defensive in building a relationship, and they're not going to put themselves in a position where they feel like they might get hurt. They're not going to be as trusting or open or receptive to love as somebody with a secure attachment style may be. But of course, let me throw in a disclaimer here. You can actually fall into one or more of the attachment styles. So it doesn't necessarily mean that, you have to be only an avoidant style of attachment. No, you can actually have an avoidant attachment style and a secure attachment style and a mixture of them. This is why I don't necessarily agree that an upbringing from childhood necessarily shapes your future and the way that you behave in your relationships 100%, because the books and the authors and nobody really wants to tell you this, but you can actually fall into more than one attachment style. And you may even find that your attachment style changes from one person to another, or even changes from day to day, week to week, depending on how you're feeling, or maybe other experiences that you've had in your life with a partner or an ex-partner that has changed your attachment style. So you can actually grow up in a household which is very loving and secure, and you get a lot of emotional reassurance from your parents, but you've experienced maybe with an ex a lot of trauma, which has actually led you to have a more of an avoidant attachment style. But getting back to the avoidant attachment style, it is said in theory that the parent or carer is less attentive and responsive to a child's emotional needs. And so as a result of this, a child who's growing up in an environment like this is going to be one who's going to learn to self-soothe. They're going to grow up to be a lot more reliant on themselves and not look to others for emotional fulfillment or any kind of coddling. They may see emotional attachment or fulfillment coming from another person as a sign of weakness. And this goes back to, as a child, them being told that them being emotional was them being weak, and that is something that is not liked. Now again, I'm going to throw another wrench in the works of the attachment style theory, where I feel that, and men may or may not agree with this, but a lot of men might understand that they fall into this category, and it's not necessarily because they didn't have loving, secure parents who was there for their emotional needs. It could also be that when they're growing up, their peer groups, their friends in particular, don't look at being emotionally available or being very emotional as a sign of strength in a man. And as a result of this, whenever a guy has tried to be emotional, they have kind of squashed it down and laughed it off. So The guy then learns that if I'm going to be emotional, I'm not going to be accepted so much into the group, so I'm not going to be so emotional. So then again, like I'm saying before, it doesn't necessarily have to do with your parents and your carers and your upbringing. It can also be with the people around you. And what tends to happen is someone who is an avoidant attachment style, when they get into relationships, are more likely to find a relationship with somebody who is actually the opposite of them, and somebody who needs a lot of emotional reassurance and is a lot more needy. But someone like this who needs a lot of emotional validation, someone who has an avoidant attachment style, is just going to find them very, very suffocating. So relationships between these two types of people tend not to last. People in this attachment style will need a lot more of a distance from their partners, both emotionally and physically. They're not going to be someone who's going to look for a lot of validation from you, or maybe not any validation at all. And if they spent some time with you where they felt like they've gotten close to you, suddenly they're going to pull away and they're going to go missing for a couple of days or a couple of hours, just so they can kind of feel like they can recharge within themselves. One also major thing is that people in this attachment style can even kind of also, be called slightly borderline narcissistic. And I have a video on what a narcissist is if you want to follow the link right here. But they can be called narcissistic because if a relationship doesn't work out, they're not going to look inwards, they're going to look outwards. They're going to have an inflated sense of ego, so they're not going to actually blame themselves. And they're going to, if something is breaking down, withdraw from the situation. They're going to go into the self-soothe, into like their little cave, self-soothe themselves. They're not going to look for validation or emotional support from anyone to get over this breakup. They're going to just withdraw within themselves. Even when they are confronted to speak about their feelings or to be more emotionally available, they're actually not going to do that. They're going to find it very uncomfortable and they're actually going to pull away. And they're always going to put themselves first in any situation in life. They're not going to be as attentive or caring about another person's needs as much. They're always going to put themselves and their emotional needs first. And what tends to happen is people like this really end up majorly alone. The majority of the relationships that they have in their life are going to be with immediate family, and even those relationships are not going to be very close ones. So with friends and such other things, they're not going to have like lifelong friendships. They're going to have friendships that are very transitory in nature. They're going to make friends with a person for the time being. Maybe they're friends at work and they only see each other at work, or they hang out every now and then outside of work. But they're going to use relationships more as stepping stones, as it's there when I need it, and if it's not there, I'm going to be fine, even though they may feel very lonely inside, rather than using relationships as something that they need to work on and they need to actually invest in emotionally, physically. And like I said before, because they have this false sense of entitlement, they're not really going to be aware of why their relationships with other people are not working out, because they're not going to actually sit down and have a critical look within themselves and think, well, maybe it's something that I'm doing wrong. And one thing you're going to often hear from somebody who's an avoidant attachment style is, after they've spent a nice time with somebody, they're going to want to go away and recharge themselves. And that recharging can sometimes take a week, and then maybe they'll spend one day with somebody else, and then they want another week of just being by themselves. Because again, they've learned to self-soothe, to rely on themselves, and to emotionally support themselves, so they don't really need the emotional support of anybody else. And when somebody criticizes someone with this attachment style, they're going to become very defensive, and they might more than likely are going to be passively aggressive. They're not necessarily going to confront you and be rude to you, but they will become passive aggressive. They don't like anyone to challenge their ego, and they're going to actually tell themselves within their voice in their own head that actually they are not wrong, the other person is wrong. And this again is going to do them no favors, and this is why people who have an avoidant attachment style tend to be people who tend to spend a lot of time alone. And some people will actually just want casual relationships for the fun of it, but someone who has an avoidant attachment style just has a lot of problem forming relationships in general. And you can actually spot them, because if you look at their circle of friends, their friends aren't really even friends. They're more like acquaintances. They don't really have anyone to spend good quality time with. They don't really have friendships that have lasted, a decade or more. They have very transitory relationships, and their friendships have probably, at the main end of it, probably lasted maybe 2, 3, 4 years, and even then that bond is not very deep. It's more of one of those friendships where it's more of an acquaintanceship. You can't really even call it a friendship. Anyway, that's my insight onto people who have an avoidant attachment style. And you may find that you fall into this category. You may find that someone you're dating is falling into this category, or someone even in a relationship is falling into this category. And I would love to hear from you more about this attachment style, and drop in the comments below what you think about it. And I hope to see you again with another video where we're talking more about the attachment style and other things that can affect our mental health and our relationships. Thank you so much for watching.